A millionaire finds a homeless girl sleeping at his doorstep, but when he sees the jacket she's wearing, he instantly bursts into tears. That jacket belonged to his daughter, his dead daughter. He takes the girl in for one night. But what starts as a moment of pity unlocks a past he never knew existed. She doesn't speak much, only draws. But one name scribbled in a corner changes everything. Mommy. Isabel. Why does this silent little girl know his deepest heartbreak? And when the truth comes out, will he be ready to face it? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. On a cold winter morning, Rafael de Leon stood in his kitchen, watching steam rise from his coffee cup. The silence of his mansion wrapped around him like a familiar blanket. He preferred it this way, quiet, orderly, predictable. The enormous house echoed with emptiness, just as he liked it. "Mr. de Leon, your car is ready," his security guard called from the hallway. Rafael nodded, though no one could see him. He straightened his expensive tie and grabbed his briefcase. Another day, another series of meetings where he would make more money he didn't need. The routine kept him moving forward, kept him from thinking too much. He walked through the marble foyer, his footsteps echoing against the high ceilings. Mrs. Alvarez, his housekeeper, nodded respectfully as she dusted a crystal vase. "Have a good day, sir," she said softly. Rafael barely acknowledged her words with a slight tilt of his head. Emotions were messy, connections were painful, and he had built his life around avoiding both. When he pulled open the heavy front door, the bitter winter air rushed in, but that wasn't what made him freeze in place. There, curled up on the marble steps of his mansion, was a small child, a girl, no more than 9 years old, with tangled hair and dirt-smudged cheeks. She was trembling, her thin arms wrapped around herself, clutching a filthy teddy bear. The jacket she wore was too small, threadbare, and patched. But it was the jacket that made Rafael's heart stop, pink with tiny embroidered butterflies along the hem. His hand gripped the doorframe as the world tilted beneath him. He knew that jacket. He had chosen it himself 5 years ago for a little girl with laughing eyes and bouncing curls. For Emma, his daughter. The child on his doorstep looked up, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. She clutched the teddy bear tighter, shrinking away from him. "Sir?" The security guard appeared behind Rafael. "Should I call the police?" Rafael couldn't speak. His gaze was fixed on the teddy bear, worn, dirty, one eye missing. The same bear he had placed in a small white coffin 5 years ago. With shaking hands, he reached down and gently took the bear from the girl's grip. She let it go without resistance, watching him with wary eyes. "Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice cracking. The girl, Elise, didn't answer. She just stared at him, shivering in the cold, her lips slightly blue. Mrs. Alvarez appeared at his side. "Oh, pobrecita, she's freezing to death." She hurried down the steps, wrapping her arm around the child's shoulders. Rafael stood paralyzed, holding the teddy bear that belonged to his dead daughter, staring at her jacket on this homeless child's back. For the first time in 5 years, the carefully constructed numbness inside him began to crack. Earlier that day, Rafael sat in the glass-walled conference room of De Leon Technologies, surrounded by executives in expensive suits. Charts and projections flashed on the screen, but Rafael couldn't focus. His attention kept drifting to his briefcase where Emma's teddy bear was hidden. "Mr. de Leon, your thoughts on the acquisition?" Rafael blinked, looking up to find everyone staring at him. This never happened. He was always sharp, always present. But today, all he could think about was the small, dirty child on his doorstep. "I need more data," he said flatly. "Schedule another meeting for next week." Confused glances passed between his team members. Rafael de Leon never postponed decisions. When the room cleared, Rafael carefully opened his briefcase and took out the bear. One button eye stared back at him, the other long gone. The fur was matted with dirt and who knows what else. He should have thrown it away immediately. Instead, he'd brought it with him like some kind of talisman. "Sir?" His driver appeared at the door. "Are you ready to leave?" Rafael quickly tucked the bear away. "Yes, take me home." But sir, you have 3 more meetings scheduled. Cancel them. The drive back to his mansion was silent. Raphael stared out the window, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. How did that child get Emma's things? Why was she at his house specifically? When they pulled up to the gates, Raphael spotted a small figure still huddled on his front steps. "Sir, the child is still there," his driver said, concern in his voice. Raphael stepped out of the car without responding. As he approached, he could hear the girl coughing, a deep, rattling sound that seemed too big for her small body. Clara, his assistant, was already there, kneeling beside the child with a worried expression. She looked up as Raphael approached. "I came by to drop off those contracts and found her still here," Clara explained, her hand gently rubbing the girl's back. "She's burning up with fever, Raphael." Raphael stood stiffly, uncomfortable with the scene before him. "Call social services." Clara's eyes flashed with rare disapproval. "It's after 5 on Friday. They won't place her until Monday at the earliest." She lowered her voice. "She needs help now." "That's not my problem," Raphael said coldly, but even he could hear the hollowness in his words. Clara stood, smoothing her skirt. "Just for one night, Raphael. We can't leave her out here to freeze." Her voice softened. "What would Emma think?" The mention of his daughter's name hit Raphael like a physical blow. He looked away, jaw clenched tight. "Fine. One night. In the guest room." He turned and walked into the house without another word. Clara carefully helped Elise to her feet. The girl swayed, weak from fever and hunger. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're going to get you warm." Inside, Raphael watched from the hallway as Clara settled Elise in the guest bedroom. The girl hadn't spoken a single word, her eyes wide and wary, tracking Raphael's movements like a cornered animal. "I'll stay with her," Clara said firmly. "You should get some rest." Raphael nodded curtly, then retreated to his bedroom, locking the door behind him. He leaned against it, heart pounding, feeling as if his carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble around him. That same night, Raphael stood at the top of the grand staircase, his fingers wrapped tightly around a crystal tumbler half filled with amber liquid. From his vantage point, he could see Elise curled up on the living room couch. Clara had insisted on moving her there after the girl's fever had broken, saying the child needed to be somewhere less intimidating than the cavernous guest bedroom. The mansion was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Raphael took another sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving the small figure below. In sleep, Elise looked even younger, her face relaxed and vulnerable. Her chest rose and fell in the steady rhythm of peaceful slumber, one hand tucked beneath her cheek, the other still clutching Emma's teddy bear. Something about the scene made Raphael's chest tighten. The way Elise's dark hair spilled across the pillow reminded him so much of, "Daddy, watch me!" Emma's voice echoed in his memory, clear as if she were right beside him. Raphael closed his eyes and suddenly he was 5 years back in time. Emma, 6 years old and full of life, was sliding down the marble banister of this very staircase, her laughter bouncing off the high ceilings. "Emma, be careful!" he had called, his heart in his throat as she flew down the polished marble. "I'm flying, Daddy," she had squealed, landing with a little hop at the bottom. Her eyes had sparkled with mischief and joy as she looked up at him. Again. Back then, the mansion had been filled with noise, Emma's footsteps pattering down hallways, her giggles erupting at the dinner table, the endless questions she'd asked about everything under the sun. Now the silence was deafening. Raphael opened his eyes, the memory fading. He drained his glass and turned away from the staircase, unable to watch Elise any longer. The resemblance was too painful, too raw. He made his way to his study, the one room in the house that didn't hold memories of Emma. He poured himself another drink, larger this time, and sank into the leather chair behind his desk. The door creaked open and Clara appeared, her face etched with concern. "She's sleeping peacefully," Clara said softly. "The fever's completely gone." Raphael nodded but didn't respond. "Raphael," Clara tried again, stepping further into the room. "It's okay to feel something. It's been 5 years." "Don't," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. Clara sighed and sat in the chair across from him. You can't keep living like this, shutting everyone out, working yourself to death. It's worked fine so far, he said coldly. Has it? Clara challenged. Look at you, Raphael, you're drowning yourself in work and whiskey. Raphael slammed his glass down on the desk. What do you want from me, Clara? To break down? To cry? Will that bring her back? His voice cracked on the last word, betraying him. Clara reached across the desk, her hand outstretched toward his, but Raphael pulled away. I don't need your pity, he said, standing abruptly. I need to be left alone. That's the last thing you need, Clara whispered, but she stood up anyway. At the door, she paused. That little girl downstairs needs help. Maybe helping her could help you too. Raphael turned his back to her, staring out the window at the darkness beyond. Good night, Clara. When the door closed behind her, Raphael pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window. A single tear escaped, the first he'd allowed himself in years, sliding down his cheek before he angrily wiped it away. The next morning, pale winter sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the De Leon mansion. Elise woke early, her small body tense as she took in her unfamiliar surroundings. The plush couch where she'd slept felt strange after so many nights on concrete and cardboard. She slipped off the couch, her bare feet silent against the cold marble floor. For a moment, she just stood there, clutching Emma's teddy bear to her chest, eyes wide as she took in the vastness of the space around her. The mansion seemed to stretch forever, with high ceilings and long hallways that disappeared into shadows. It was beautiful, but empty, like a museum after hours. Elise padded quietly through the living room and into a wide hallway lined with framed photographs. Her gaze traveled over the pictures, formal portraits mostly, showing a younger Raphael in business settings, shaking hands with important-looking people. But then she stopped, frozen in place. There, in an ornate silver frame larger than the others, was a portrait of a little girl. The girl had dark hair like Elise's, but her eyes sparkled with joy. She wore a red dress and a wide smile that showed a missing front tooth. Something about her made Elise's heart hurt. She reached out one finger, almost touching the glass before pulling back. That's Emma, came a gentle voice behind her. Elise jumped and spun around to find Clara watching her with kind eyes. She was Mr. De Leon's daughter, Clara explained, moving closer but careful not to crowd the nervous child. She passed away 5 years ago. Elise looked back at the portrait, her expression unreadable. Are you hungry, sweetheart? Clara asked, changing the subject. I've made pancakes. Do you like pancakes? Elise didn't answer, but she followed Clara to the kitchen, still clutching the teddy bear. The kitchen was warm and bright, a stark contrast to the rest of the house. Clara pulled out a chair at the island counter, and Elise climbed up, her eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. Here you go, Clara said, placing a plate of golden pancakes in front of her. With extra syrup, just how kids like it. Elise stared at the food but made no move to eat. Clara frowned slightly, then brightened. Oh, I know. She rummaged in a drawer and pulled out a notepad and pencil. Maybe you'd like to draw while I fix Mr. De Leon's coffee? Elise hesitated, then reached for the pencil. Her small fingers wrapped around it with surprising confidence. As Clara busied herself with breakfast preparations, Elise bent over the paper, her pencil moving with quick, deliberate strokes. 20 minutes later, Raphael entered the kitchen, his face a carefully composed mask. He stopped short when he saw Elise at the counter. Good morning, Clara said brightly, placing a mug of black coffee on the counter. Our guest is quite the artist. Raphael approached slowly, looking over Elise's shoulder at her drawing. His breath caught. On the paper was a detailed sketch of the mansion's front steps, the very place where he'd found her. But the perspective was from someone lying there, looking up at the imposing door. The lines were simple but powerful, capturing both the grandeur of the house and the smallness of whoever was viewing it. She hasn't touched her breakfast, Clara said quietly, but she's filled 3 pages already. Raphael stared at the drawing, then at Elise. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps, or pain, but he quickly schooled his features back to neutrality. I see, he said, his voice carefully controlled. He picked up his coffee and turned away, but not before Elise looked up and their eyes met. In that brief connection, something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding of loss that neither could articulate. In the meantime, Raphael slipped away to the east wing of the mansion, where he kept Emma's things untouched. His footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as he approached the storage room. With a deep breath, he unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room smelled of cardboard and faint traces of Emma's cherry blossom perfume. Boxes labeled in Clara's neat handwriting lined the walls. Emma's books, Emma's summer clothes, Emma's art projects. Raphael moved to a box marked Emma's keepsakes and carefully lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among other treasures, was a photo album bound in pink leather. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The first page showed Emma on her 5th birthday, beaming at the camera with chocolate cake on her cheeks, and there, clutched in her small arms, was a teddy bear, nearly identical to the one Elise carried. "How is this possible?" Raphael whispered, running his finger over the photo. The bear had been Emma's constant companion, buried with her after the accident. This couldn't be the same one. Yet the resemblance was uncanny. The same worn patches, the same crooked smile. Meanwhile, Clara sat at the kitchen counter, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed tones. "Yes, she appears healthy but hasn't spoken a word," Clara explained. "No identification, just the clothes on her back and a teddy bear." The social worker on the other end asked several questions about Elise's condition and whereabouts. "Mr. De Leon has allowed her to stay temporarily," Clara continued, "but we need to find out where she belongs. Someone must be looking for her." Raphael entered the kitchen just as Clara was finishing the call. His face darkened when he realized what she was doing. "Who were you talking to?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Clara straightened her shoulders. "Child services, we need to report finding Elise. It's the law, Raphael." "You had no right," he snapped, color rising in his face. "This is my house. You're interfering in matters that don't concern you." "Don't concern me?" Clara's voice rose slightly. "That child needs help and we need to do things properly. What were you planning to do? Keep her here indefinitely without telling anyone?" Raphael's jaw tightened. "I just need time to figure this out. There's something about her, something I can't explain." Before Clara could respond, they both realized Elise was no longer in the kitchen. Panic flashed across Raphael's face as he hurried out of the room, Clara following close behind. They found her upstairs, standing in the doorway of Emma's bedroom. The room remained exactly as it had been 5 years ago. Pink walls, canopy bed, shelves lined with dolls and stuffed animals. It was a shrine to a life cut short, preserved in painful perfection. Elise stepped inside, her small figure dwarfed by the grandeur of the princess-themed room. She moved with quiet reverence, touching nothing at first, just taking in the space. Then, slowly, she approached the bookshelf and gently ran her fingers over a porcelain ballerina. Raphael watched from the doorway, frozen in place. No one had entered this room in years, not the cleaning staff, not Clara, not even himself. He couldn't bear to disturb the last place Emma had existed. Yet here was Elise moving through his daughter's sacred space with a familiarity that stole his breath. Clara stood behind Raphael, watching his reaction, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the doorframe. She hadn't seen him this affected since the funeral. "Raphael," she whispered, but he didn't seem to hear her. Elise picked up a small snow globe from Emma's nightstand and gave it a gentle shake, watching the glitter swirl around a tiny carousel horse. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, the first they'd seen. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly as she observed the scene. There was something about the way Elise moved through the room, something in her connection to these objects that felt deeper than curiosity. A suspicion began to form in her mind, though she couldn't yet put it into words. After a while, Clara found herself alone in the kitchen, washing dishes with mechanical precision. Her mind raced with questions about the little girl who had appeared so mysteriously on their doorstep. Something about Elise tugged at her memory, something important she couldn't quite place. She dried her hands and headed toward the storage room where Raphael kept Emma's belongings. She didn't often go in there. It was Raphael's private space of grief, but a nagging thought pushed her forward. Clara flipped through the inventory list she had created years ago when they packed everything away. Her finger ran down the page until she found what she was looking for. Emma's winter jacket, pink with fur trim, size 8. According to her meticulous records, the jacket should be in box E17. With careful movements, Clara located the box and lifted the lid. Her breath caught. The space where the jacket should have been was empty. "That's impossible," she whispered. She checked the list again, then searched through nearby boxes. Nothing. Clara's hands trembled as realization dawned. The jacket Elise wore when she arrived, Emma's jacket, had never been donated. It had been locked away with Emma's belongings. So how did this little girl end up wearing it? In the study, Elise sat cross-legged on the carpet, hunched over a piece of paper. Raphael watched from his desk, pretending to work on his laptop while stealing glances at the child. She had been drawing steadily for almost an hour, her small face scrunched in concentration. When Clara entered, her face pale with discovery, Raphael looked up questioningly. Before she could speak, Elise finished her drawing with a flourish and held it up. The picture showed a stick figure of a child, presumably Elise, holding hands with a taller figure, a woman with long dark hair. At the bottom of the page, written in wobbly letters, was a name, Isabel. "Who's that?" Raphael asked gently, pointing to the woman in the drawing. Elise clutched the paper to her chest protectively, not answering. Clara moved closer, kneeling beside Elise. "Is Isabel someone you know, sweetheart?" The little girl nodded slightly but remained silent. Raphael's eyes narrowed at the name. Something about it stirred a distant memory, but he couldn't place it. He stood and walked around his desk, crouching down to Elise's level. "Elise," he said, his voice softer than Clara had heard in years. "Where did you get that jacket? The pink one you were wearing when you came here?" The question hung in the air. Elise's small shoulders tensed, and for a moment, Clara thought she might retreat back into silence. Then, barely audible, a single word escaped her lips. "Mommy." The room went still. It was the first word Elise had spoken since arriving. Raphael and Clara exchanged shocked glances. Clara's hand flew to her mouth and Raphael seemed frozen in place, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Your mommy gave you that jacket?" Clara asked carefully. Elise nodded, then pointed to the woman in her drawing. "Isabel," she whispered, the name slightly more confident on her lips than the previous word. Raphael stared at the drawing, then at Elise, his mind racing to connect dots that seemed impossible. "Isabel," he repeated, the name stirring something deep in his memory. Just then, Clara held out the drawing toward Raphael with trembling hands. The simple sketch showed a stick figure child holding hands with a taller figure, a faceless woman with long dark hair. At the bottom, in childish handwriting, was the name Isabel. "Raphael," Clara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "does this name mean anything to you?" Raphael took the drawing, his fingers stiff. His face drained of color as he stared at the name. For a moment he seemed somewhere else entirely, lost in a memory. "No," he said too quickly, too firmly. "I don't know any Isabel." Clara watched him carefully, noting the muscle twitching in his jaw, a tell she recognized from years of working with him. "Are you certain?" "Because your reaction suggests otherwise." Raphael turned away, placing the drawing face down on his desk. "It's a common name." "Raphael," Clara pressed gently, "if there's something—" "Fine," he snapped, running a hand through his hair. "There was an Isabel in college. It was nothing serious." But his eyes told a different story. Clara waited, knowing from experience that silence often drew more from Raphael than questions. After a long pause, he sighed. "Isabel Winters. She was different, free-spirited, the opposite of me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before vanishing. "We dated for a semester, then she disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation. I never heard from her again." Clara's eyes widened. "How long ago was this?" "Almost 10 years, Raphael answered, his voice distant. "Right before I started the company." The timeline hung between them, unspoken but impossible to ignore. 10 years. Elise looked about 9. Before Clara could respond, a small cough from the hallway interrupted them. Elise stood swaying slightly, her cheeks flushed pink. "Sweetie, are you feeling okay?" Clara rushed to her side, pressing a hand to the child's forehead. "You're burning up." Raphael watched from a distance as Clara guided Elise to the guest bedroom. Something in his chest tightened at the sight of the small, vulnerable child. For hours, he busied himself with work, trying to ignore the commotion as Clara called the doctor and administered children's medicine. Night fell. The house grew quiet except for Elise's occasional coughing. Raphael found himself standing outside her bedroom door, listening. Before he could talk himself out of it, he entered. The room was dim, lit only by a small nightlight. Elise tossed restlessly in the large bed, her forehead glistening with sweat. Without thinking, Raphael went to the adjoining bathroom, soaked a washcloth in cool water, and returned to her bedside. Gently, awkwardly, he placed the damp cloth on her forehead. Elise's eyes fluttered but didn't open. As he adjusted the blanket around her small shoulders, she murmured in her sleep, "Isabel, Mommy, don't leave." Raphael froze, his hand still on the blanket. The words hit him like a physical blow. He stared down at Elise's face, really looked at it for the first time. The curve of her cheek, the shape of her eyebrows. Had he been blind? From the doorway, Clara watched silently as Raphael tenderly tucked the blanket around Elise, his hands trembling slightly. The hard lines of his face had softened, replaced by something she hadn't seen in years, compassion mixed with dawning recognition. Years earlier, Raphael leaned against the art building wall, cigarette dangling from his lips. He wasn't the tech millionaire yet, just a brilliant, rebellious engineering student with too much anger and too little direction. "Those will kill you, you know," a voice called out. Raphael turned to see a girl with paint-splattered jeans and wild, dark hair. She carried a portfolio case almost bigger than herself. "We're all dying anyway," he replied with a smirk. "That's deep," she laughed, rolling her eyes. "I'm Isabel." That was how it began. For 3 whirlwind months, Raphael's carefully structured world exploded with color. Isabel painted while he coded late into the night. She dragged him to poetry readings and music festivals. He showed her the stars through the campus telescope. "You see patterns in everything," Isabel told him one night, her head on his chest. "Numbers, stars, systems. And you see beauty in chaos," he replied, running his fingers through her hair. When she disappeared without a word, Raphael spent weeks searching. He called her friends, her roommate, even her academic advisor. Nobody knew anything, or if they did, they wouldn't tell him. Eventually, his pride took over. He buried himself in his work, founded his company, and locked away the memory of the girl who taught him to see beauty in imperfection. Back to present day, Clara closed the bedroom door quietly, leaving Elise sleeping peacefully. The fever had broken, but the mystery had only deepened. She walked to Raphael's study, knowing he kept boxes of old papers and mementos there. "Isabel Winters," she whispered to herself as she searched through the shelves. Her loyalty to Raphael ran deep, but the little girl sleeping upstairs deserved answers too. In the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet, she found what she was looking for: Raphael's college yearbook. She flipped through the pages until she reached the art department, and there she was, Isabel Winters, dark curly hair framing a heart-shaped face, eyes bright with mischief and talent. Clara's breath caught. She looked from the photograph to the doorway, thinking of the child sleeping upstairs. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same delicate chin, the same curve of the eyebrows. "Oh, Raphael," she whispered. "What did you miss all these years?" Clara knew what she had to do. The next morning, while Raphael was on a conference call and Elise was drawing quietly in the sunroom, Clara approached the little girl with a gentle smile. "Your hair's getting a bit tangled, sweetie," she said casually. "Would you mind if I brushed it for you?" Elise nodded shyly. As Clara carefully worked through the knots, she discreetly collected several strands that came loose in the brush, placing them in a tissue before slipping it into her pocket. Later, alone in her car, Clara called a number she'd found online. "DNA testing solutions," she said quietly into her phone. "I'd like to arrange a private paternity test." The receptionist asked several questions which Clara answered in hushed tones. This wasn't just about solving a mystery anymore. This was about a little girl who might have a father who didn't know she existed, and a man who had lost too much already. Clara stared at the strands of hair in the small evidence bag. For 15 years, she had been Raphael's right hand, his confidant, his shield against the world. Now she was going behind his back. "I'm sorry, Raphael," she whispered, "but some truths need to be uncovered." The next morning, sunlight filtered through the heavy curtains of Raphael's mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Elise sat cross-legged on the living room carpet, her small fingers working quickly with the colored pencils Clara had given her. Raphael stood in the doorway, coffee cup in hand, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "She's been at it since dawn," Clara whispered, appearing beside him. "Won't even stop for breakfast." Raphael nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. The bitter taste matched his mood, restless, unsettled. He'd barely slept, haunted by memories of Isabel and questions about the silent child who'd appeared on his doorstep. Elise suddenly looked up as if sensing their presence. Her eyes, so solemn and knowing, locked with Raphael's. She lifted her drawing pad and turned it toward him. The coffee cup slipped from Raphael's fingers, shattering on the floor. He didn't notice. "That's impossible," he whispered. On the page was a perfect sketch of a lighthouse. Not just any lighthouse, but one with a distinctive red band around its middle and a small keeper's cottage nestled against its base. The very same lighthouse Emma had painted again and again during her short life. Clara rushed forward with a towel for the spilled coffee, but Raphael stepped over the mess, moving closer to Elise's drawing. "Where did you see this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Elise pointed to her head, then hugged herself tightly. "It's in her memory," Clara said softly. "Raphael, this can't be coincidence." Raphael knelt beside Elise, studying her face. "This lighthouse, it's not famous. It's not in pictures or books. How could you know about it?" Elise only shrugged, her eyes wide and earnest. Later in the kitchen, Clara cornered Raphael while Elise continued drawing. "I've sent the samples," she said quietly. "The DNA test results should be back in a few days." Raphael nodded distractedly, still holding Elise's lighthouse drawing. "You should take her there," Clara suggested, "to the lighthouse. That's 3 hours away in a tiny coastal town where Isabel might have lived," Clara finished. "Where answers might be waiting." Raphael ran a hand through his hair. "This is crazy." "Maybe," Clara admitted. "But look at that drawing again and tell me you don't need to know." The drive to the coastal town was mostly silent. Elise pressed her face against the window, watching the scenery change from city to countryside to seaside. Raphael gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing with possibilities he wasn't ready to face. As they entered the small town, something changed in Elise. She sat up straighter, her eyes darting from landmark to landmark. When they passed a small ice cream shop with a faded blue awning, she pointed excitedly. "You know this place?" Raphael asked. Elise nodded vigorously. A chill ran down Raphael's spine. He'd never been to this town except once, 15 years ago, when he'd followed Isabel here during a spring break road trip. They'd gotten ice cream at that very shop. When the lighthouse came into view, standing tall against the gray-blue sky, both Raphael and Elise fell completely still. It was exactly as she had drawn it, exactly as Emma had painted it years ago. "How is this possible?" Raphael whispered, more to himself than to Elise. For the first time since her arrival, Elise reached out and took his hand in hers. Her small fingers wrapped around his, warm and trusting. Raphael didn't pull away. At dusk, the small harbor town took on a golden glow. Street lamps flickered to life as Raphael and Elise walked along the weathered boardwalk, both lost in their own thoughts. The lighthouse stood in the distance, a silent sentinel against the darkening sky. "Let's get something to eat," Raphael said, noticing how quiet Elise had become. Her eyes kept darting around the town, recognition flashing across her face at random moments. They found a small cafe nestled between a bait shop and a souvenir store. The bell above the door jingled as they entered. The place was nearly empty, just an old fisherman nursing a coffee in the corner and a middle-aged couple finishing their meal. "Sit anywhere you like," called a gray-haired waitress from behind the counter. She was wiping down mugs, her movements practiced and efficient. Raphael guided Elise to a booth by the window. The girl slid in, immediately picking up a paper placemat and crayons left for children. She began to draw, her face serious with concentration. The waitress approached with menus, but as she got closer, she stopped suddenly. Her eyes widened as she stared at Elise. "My goodness," she whispered, one hand flying to her heart. "You're Izzy's little girl." Raphael's head snapped up. "Excuse me?" The waitress couldn't take her eyes off Elise. "It's like seeing a ghost. You look just like your mama, sweetheart." Elise stopped drawing, her pencil frozen mid-stroke. "You knew Isabel?" Raphael asked, his voice barely audible. "Knew her? Honey, she worked right here in this cafe for almost 5 years. The woman's eyes grew misty. "Such a sweet soul. And you must be—" She looked at Raphael with new interest. "I'm Raphael," he said, his throat tight. "I knew Isabel in college." The waitress pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. "I'm Martha. I own this place." She reached out and touched Elise's hand gently. "We all loved your mama, sweetie." Raphael leaned forward. "Martha, can you tell me what happened? Where Isabel went after college?" Martha's face fell. "Oh, you don't know. Isabel passed away almost 2 years ago now. Terrible car accident on Route 16. The words hit Raphael like physical blows. Elise suddenly moved around the table and pressed herself against his side, burying her face in his jacket. Without thinking, he put his arm around her small shoulders. "She lived here with Elise?" Raphael asked, his voice shaking. Martha nodded. Right above the cafe, Izzy was so proud of her little artist. She smiled sadly at Elise. "Always drawing, just like her mama." Raphael struggled to breathe. "And Elise's father?" "Never knew him myself. Izzy didn't talk much about him, just said he was someone special from her past." Martha stood up suddenly. "Wait right here." She disappeared into the back room and returned moments later with a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. "Isabel left this," Martha said, placing it on the table. "Said it was for Elise's father, if he ever came looking. No one ever did." Raphael stared at the envelope, his name written in Isabel's flowing script. Elise pressed closer to him, trembling slightly. "She's yours, isn't she?" Martha asked gently. Raphael looked down at Elise, seeing Isabel in her eyes, seeing hints of himself in the curve of her jaw. The truth he'd been avoiding crashed over him like a wave. "Yes," he whispered, tightening his arm around Elise. "She's mine." On that very night, Raphael sat in the dim light of their modest hotel room, the sealed envelope trembling in his hands. Elise had fallen asleep almost immediately, curled up in the twin bed with her teddy bear tucked under her chin. Her breathing was soft and even, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Raphael. He ran his finger along the edge of the envelope, feeling the weight of years in its yellowed paper. After several false starts, he finally tore it open and unfolded the letter inside. Isabel's handwriting flowed across the page just as he remembered, artistic and full of life. "My dearest Raphael, if you're reading this, you've finally found our daughter. I've imagined this moment 1,000 times, wondering if you'd be angry, confused, or perhaps even happy. I hope it's the latter." Raphael's vision blurred as he continued reading. "I never told you about my pregnancy. You were just starting your company, ready to change the world. Your dreams were so big, and I couldn't bear to be the reason they might never come true. You were on the verge of everything you'd worked for. I told myself I was being selfless, but maybe I was just afraid." Teardrops had stained the paper long ago, warping the ink in places. Raphael touched one of the marks gently, imagining Isabel crying as she wrote these words. "Elise is so much like you, stubborn, bright, with that same faraway look you'd get when solving a problem no one else could see. She's also an artist, like me. I've told her stories about her father, a brilliant man who would have loved her if he'd known her. Raphael's chest tightened painfully. He looked over at Elise's sleeping form, seeing now what he'd been blind to before, the shape of her eyes, the determined set of her jaw even in sleep. His daughter, his child. About the jacket and bear, this might surprise you. Elise found them at a charity shop in town last year. She was drawn to them instantly. I never knew where they came from originally. If they hold meaning for you, perhaps it's the universe's way of connecting what should never have been separated. Raphael's breath caught. Emma's jacket and bear, donated after her death when he couldn't bear to look at them anymore, had somehow found their way to his other daughter. The coincidence was too profound to be mere chance. I'm sorry, Raphael. I'm sorry I kept her from you. I'm sorry I won't be there when you meet her. Love her. Protect her. She deserves the world. Forever yours, Isabel Starr. The letter slipped from Raphael's fingers and fell to the carpet. He moved to Elise's bedside and sank to his knees, tears flowing freely now. The girl who had appeared on his doorstep like a ghost was his flesh and blood, a child he never knew existed, who had unknowingly carried pieces of her half-sister with her. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I didn't know. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. I should have been there for you, for your mother, for both my daughters. Elise stirred slightly but didn't wake. Raphael stayed beside her bed, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs as years of frozen grief finally began to thaw. In the quiet darkness of that hotel room, something long dormant in Raphael's heart cracked open and began tentatively to heal. Soon after, Raphael and Elise returned to New York, the weight of Isabel's letter still heavy on Raphael's mind. The mansion that had once felt cavernous and empty now hummed with a quiet tension as they waited. Clara had been busy in their absence, and the DNA test results were due any day. When the envelope finally arrived, Clara brought it to Raphael's study with careful hands. Her eyes were kind, but nervous. It's here, she said simply, placing the sealed envelope on his desk. Raphael stared at it for a long moment. Elise sat in a chair by the window, drawing as she often did, seemingly oblivious to the life-changing information contained in that simple white envelope. Would you like me to stay? Clara asked softly. Raphael shook his head. Number, but don't go far. His fingers trembled as he tore open the envelope. The clinical language of the report blurred before his eyes until he found what he was looking for. A 99.9% probability of paternity. The words seemed to pulse on the page. I am your father, he whispered, looking up at Elise. She had stopped drawing and was watching him with those observant eyes that now, unmistakably, reminded him of his own mother's. I am your father, he repeated louder this time. Your mother? Isabel. She and I knew each other many years ago. I didn't know about you. I would have... His voice cracked. I would have been there if I'd known. Elise set down her pencil and slid from her chair. She crossed the room with small, deliberate steps. Raphael knelt down to meet her at eye level, the test results still clutched in his hand. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, truly seeing each other for the first time. Then, without a word, Elise stepped forward and wrapped her thin arms around his neck. It was the first time she had initiated any physical contact. Raphael froze for a heartbeat before enveloping her in a gentle embrace, afraid she might break or disappear if he held too tight. Over Elise's shoulder, he saw Clara in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. That night, after Elise had gone to bed, Raphael stood outside Emma's room. The "Do Not Enter" sign he'd placed there years ago stared back at him accusingly. With a deep breath, he removed it and set it aside. The next morning, he found Elise in the hallway, gazing at Emma's door. Would you like to see inside? He asked gently. Elise nodded, her eyes wide with curiosity. Raphael pushed the door open, revealing the preserved shrine to his lost daughter, toys untouched, books still open to the pages Emma had last read, her artwork taped carefully to the walls. This was Emma's room. She She was your sister. The words felt strange, but right on his tongue. I think it's time we sorted through some of her things. Together, they entered the room that had been sealed in grief for so long. Raphael pulled a box from the closet and began carefully removing items. Elise picked up a small watercolor painting of a butterfly and studied it. Emma painted that when she was about your age, Raphael explained, his voice thick with emotion. She loved butterflies. Elise smiled, a rare, precious sight, and gently placed the painting in a keep pile. As they worked side by side, Raphael felt something shift inside him, as if Emma's memory, instead of being a wall between him and the world, was becoming a bridge. As time went on, the grand mansion that had once echoed with emptiness began to fill with small, everyday sounds, the scrape of chairs at breakfast, quiet conversations, even the occasional laugh. Rafael de Leon, who had spent years moving through his home like a ghost, now woke before the sun, padding downstairs to prepare breakfast for Elise. His first attempts at pancakes were disastrous, burned on the outside, gooey in the middle. But Elise ate them anyway, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Is it really okay? Raphael asked, watching her chew with determination. Mommy said it's the love that matters, not if it tastes good, Elise replied softly, offering him a rare glimpse into her past. Raphael's heart squeezed at the mention of Isabel. What else did your mommy say? Elise thought for a moment, pushing her fork through the syrupy mess. She said art helps the hurt places heal, and that the sky is never the same color twice. Each morning became a little easier. Raphael learned that Elise preferred her toast barely browned, and that she would eat strawberries by the handful if given the chance. He discovered she hummed when she drew, quiet, tuneless melodies that filled the kitchen while he washed dishes. The first time he walked her to school, they both moved stiffly, uncertain of the protocol. Raphael stood awkwardly at the school gate, watching as Elise clutched her backpack straps. I'll be right here at 3 o'clock, he promised. By the third week, Elise reached for his hand as they walked, her small fingers curling trustingly into his palm. Raphael felt something crack open inside him, a door he'd thought permanently sealed. Mr. De Leon, Elise's art teacher greeted him one afternoon. I wanted to show you something. She led him to a display of student artwork. In the center hung Elise's painting, a portrait of a man with Raphael's features, surrounded by warm yellow light. She's quite talented, the teacher said, and she speaks about you often now. Clara watched these changes unfold with quiet satisfaction. She noticed how Raphael's shoulders had loosened, how he'd started taking business calls in the garden where he could watch Elise draw. Most telling was his smile. No longer the practice curve he'd perfected for board meetings, but something genuine that reached his eyes. One evening, while Elise was upstairs getting ready for bed, Clara placed her tablet in front of Raphael. I've been in touch with Marissa Jenkins at Child Services, she said carefully. She thinks you have a strong case for legal guardianship, given the circumstances. Raphael stared at the screen, at the forms waiting to be filled out. You think I'm ready? He asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Clara smiled. I've known you for 15 years, Raphael. I've never seen you more ready for anything. That night, after tucking Elise in, Raphael lingered in the doorway, watching her sleep. The bear, Emma's bear, was clutched against her chest, its worn fur catching the hallway light. Good night, little one, he whispered, words he hadn't spoken in years. Later that day, Raphael sat in his office reviewing the guardianship paperwork Clara had prepared. His fingers traced over the empty signature lines, a flutter of hope rising in his chest. The forms represented something he hadn't dared imagine just weeks ago, a future with Elise, a chance to be the father he should have been all along. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. Melissa, his office assistant, poked her head in. Mr. De Leon? There's a woman in the lobby insisting on seeing you. She won't make an appointment and says it's about a family matter. Melissa's expression was apologetic. She's quite determined. Raphael frowned. Did she give a name? Lorraine Grant. She says she's related to Before Melissa could finish, Clara appeared behind her, face tense. "I'll handle this, Raphael." Clara made her way to the lobby where a slim woman in an expensive but slightly worn suit paced near the reception desk. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she checked her watch every few seconds. "Ms. Grant? I'm Clara Williams, Mr. DeLeon's executive assistant. How can I help you?" The woman turned, her eyes narrowing. "Finally, I've been waiting for 20 minutes. She adjusted her designer handbag. "I'm Elise Chambers' aunt, Isabel's sister. I need to speak with Raphael DeLeon immediately." Clara kept her expression neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. "Mr. DeLeon is in meetings all afternoon. Perhaps if you could tell me what this is regarding?" "Regarding?" Lorraine's laugh was sharp. "It's regarding my niece who's apparently living with a stranger, a man my sister never even mentioned to our family." Clara noticed how Lorraine's eyes darted around the expensive lobby, taking inventory of the wealth on display. More concerning was what she didn't see. No questions about Elise's health or happiness. No emotional response to finding her missing niece. "We've been searching for Elise since Isabel's funeral," Lorraine continued, though something in her tone rang false. "Imagine my surprise when I discover she's been taken in by a billionaire." "Taken in?" Clara repeated carefully. Lorraine pulled out a business card. "My lawyer will be in touch. I have documents, family documents, that will clear this up." She thrust the card into Clara's hand. "I'm Elise's only living relative. Blood matters in court." After Lorraine left, Clara immediately called Raphael, warning him about the encounter. He rushed home, mind racing with fears he thought he'd begun to overcome. When he reached his penthouse door, a white envelope lay on the floor, partially slid under the doorway. Raphael's hands trembled as he picked it up and tore it open. Inside was a formal legal notice, petition for custody review, in the matter of Elise Marie Chambers. Raphael sank against the wall, the paper clutched in his fist. Just when he'd started to believe he could be a father again, just when Elise had begun to trust him, this woman, this stranger, threatened to take it all away. The next morning, Raphael sat across from Linda Mercer, a top family attorney in New York. Sunlight streamed through the office windows, but it did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in his chest since finding Lorraine's legal notice. "So you had no knowledge of Elise's existence until recently?" Linda asked, jotting notes on her yellow legal pad. Raphael shook his head. "None. Isabel never told me she was pregnant." His voice cracked slightly. "I would have been there. I would have taken care of them both." Linda nodded sympathetically, but her expression remained serious. "And there's nothing in writing from Isabel naming you as Elise's father? No birth certificate with your name?" "Just the letter she left at the cafe and now the DNA test." Clara, sitting beside Raphael, handed Linda a folder. "Here's the DNA confirmation and the timeline of events since Elise arrived." Linda reviewed the documents, her brow furrowing deeper with each page. "I won't sugarcoat this, Raphael. Lorraine's case could be strong. Courts generally favor blood relatives, especially when the other party was unaware and uninvolved in the child's life." "Uninvolved because I didn't know," Raphael's voice rose. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to calm down. "Sorry." "I understand your frustration," Linda said gently. "But judges look at stability and established relationships. Lorraine could argue she's Elise's known family, while you're essentially a stranger who's had the child for just a few weeks." Raphael's stomach twisted. "Elise is my daughter, and we'll fight to prove that relationship deserves protection," Linda assured him. "We need to establish that you can provide not just financial support, but emotional stability. We need character witnesses, evidence of your growing bond." A small sound from the doorway cut through the conversation. They all turned to see Elise standing there, her thin shoulders hunched forward, eyes wide with fear. "Am I going away again?" she whispered, her voice so small it seemed to disappear into the air. The question hit Raphael like a physical blow. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and knelt before her. "Elise," her chin trembled, "that lady wants to take me away, doesn't she?" Raphael gently took her hands in his. They were cold and shaking. "Listen to me," he said, looking directly into her eyes. I promise you, I will do everything, to keep you right here with me. A tear slid down Elise's cheek. But what if you can't? Then I'll never stop trying, Raphael said firmly. You're my daughter, Elise. I missed too many years with you already. I'm not going to miss any more. Clara quietly excused herself and the lawyer, giving them privacy. Raphael pulled Elise into a hug, feeling her small body shake with silent sobs. That night, after tucking Elise into bed with extra reassurances, Raphael sat in his study surrounded by Isabel's letters and photos. Clara brought him coffee as he pored over every word, searching for anything that might strengthen his case. There has to be something here, he muttered, running his hand through his hair. Some proof that Isabel wanted me to know Elise, that she intended for us to be together. Clara watched him with concern. We'll find it, Raphael. We won't let Lorraine take her. Raphael nodded, determination hardening his features as he reached for another letter. He was no longer the broken man who had opened his door to find a little girl on his doorstep. Now he was a father preparing to fight for his child. By the time he arrived at the courthouse, Raphael's confidence had already begun to waver. The morning had started with determination as he dressed in his best suit, the one that commanded respect in boardrooms. But now, clutching his folder of carefully prepared guardianship papers, he felt a creeping dread. The clerk at the family court desk looked up at him with an expression that made his stomach drop. Mr. De Leon, I was just about to call you, she said, pulling out a different set of papers. There's been a filing regarding Elise Grant. Raphael's throat tightened. Grant? Her name is De Leon. The clerk's eyes softened with sympathy. According to these emergency papers filed this morning by Lorraine Grant, she's Elise's legal next of kin. Ms. Grant has requested immediate temporary custody pending investigation. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Raphael's feet. That's impossible. I'm her father. We have DNA proof. I understand, sir, but Ms. Grant's petition claims you've never been legally established as the father and that the child was placed with you under questionable circumstances. The clerk slid a copy of the order across the counter. A hearing has been set for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Raphael stared at the document, his vision blurring with rage and fear. How had Lorraine moved so quickly? Who was helping her? His phone rang. The school's number flashed on the screen. Mr. De Leon, this is Principal Warner. There's been an incident with Elise. Elise huddled in the corner of Raphael's study, her small body shaking with sobs. Her backpack lay discarded by the door where she'd dropped it after running all the way home from school. She said I'd be going with her soon, Elise whispered, clutching Emma's teddy bear. She said you weren't really my dad. Raphael knelt beside her, fighting to keep his voice steady. What exactly happened, sweetheart? The lady, Aunt Lorraine. She came during recess. She told the teacher she was my aunt and wanted to talk to me. Elise wiped her nose with her sleeve. She showed me pictures of a big house with a swimming pool. She said that's where I'd live with her in a better place, and Raphael's jaw clenched. What did you tell her? I said I wanted to stay with you. Elise's eyes filled with fresh tears. Then she got mad and said you were just pretending to care about me. So I ran away. Raphael pulled her into a tight hug, his mind racing with fury. Lorraine had gone to Elise's school, had spoken to his daughter without permission. The violation made his blood boil. I'm going to fix this, he promised. You're staying right here with me. Clara was organizing files when Raphael burst through her office door. She jumped at the sound of it slamming against the wall. Raphael, what did you know about Isabel? He demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. And don't lie to me, Clara. Not anymore. Clara's face paled. What happened? Lorraine filed for emergency custody. She went to Elise's school today, terrified her. Raphael slammed the court papers onto Clara's desk. Someone's been feeding her information. Someone who knew about Isabel and me. Clara's hands trembled slightly. Raphael, How long? His voice cracked. How long have you known about Isabel? About Elise? Clara sank into her chair, tears welling in her eyes. Sit down, Raphael. Please. With shaking hands, she opened her bottom desk drawer and removed a small wooden box. From it, She pulled out several envelopes, all addressed to Raphael, all in the same flowing handwriting. "Isabel wrote to you," Clara whispered, "years ago." Back then, Clara's hands trembled as she placed the bundle of letters on her desk. Each envelope was slightly yellowed with age, but the handwriting remained clear. Flowing, artistic strokes that spelled Raphael's name with care. "She started writing after she left college," Clara explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "At first I thought she was just another girl from your past looking for money. You were just starting to make it big then." Raphael stared at the letters, his face ashen. "And you decided this for me?" "I was protecting you," Clara said, tears welling in her eyes. "Then Emma died and you were so broken. When Isabel's letters started mentioning a child," she swallowed hard. "I thought it would destroy you completely." Raphael picked up one of the envelopes with trembling fingers. The postmark was from 9 years ago, when Elise would have been just a baby. He tore it open, unfolding the pages inside. "Raphael," he read aloud, his voice cracking. "I've tried calling your office again, but your assistant says you're unavailable. Our daughter is beautiful. Her name is Elise, and she has your eyes." He let the letter fall from his hands. "She tried to tell me she wanted me to know." "There were emails too," Clara admitted, pulling out printed copies. "She sent photos of Elise as a baby. I deleted them all." Raphael's face hardened, years of suppressed emotion breaking through his carefully constructed walls. "You had no right. No right." His fist came down on Clara's desk with such force that her cup of pens toppled over. 9 years, Clara. I missed 9 years of my daughter's life because you decided I couldn't handle it." "Raphael, please." "I trusted you," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You were the one person I trusted." Clara reached for his arm. "I was trying to protect you." "You're fired." The words came out cold and final. "Pack your things and be out by morning." "Raphael, get out!" he roared, sweeping the letters into his arms before storming toward the door. "I never want to see you again." That night, the mansion felt emptier than ever. Raphael sat alone on the cold marble steps outside, the same place where he'd found Elise just weeks ago. The night air bit at his skin, but he barely noticed. Spread around him were Isabel's letters, 9 years of attempts to reach him, to tell him about their daughter. His shoulders shook as silent tears streamed down his face. So much lost time. So many moments he could never get back. The front door creaked open behind him. Small, hesitant footsteps approached until Elise appeared at his side, wrapped in her pajamas and a blanket. Without a word, she sat down next to him on the cold step. She didn't ask questions or demand explanations. She simply leaned against him, resting her small head on his shoulder. Raphael froze for a moment, then gently placed his arm around her. Together they sat in silence, father and daughter, surrounded by the fragments of a past that could never be reclaimed but a future that was still theirs to build. Eventually, Raphael found himself sitting at his office desk late into the evening, surrounded by sketches and notes. The pain of Clara's betrayal still burned, but something else had taken root alongside it: purpose. On the notepad before him, he'd written the words, "Emma's Steps," in bold letters. "Mr. De Leon?" His new assistant knocked softly. "The nonprofit consultant is here." Raphael nodded, straightening his tie as a middle-aged woman with kind eyes entered the room. "Ms. Patel," he greeted her, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Your proposal intrigued me," she replied, settling into the chair across from him. "A network of shelters specifically designed for homeless children is something this city desperately needs." Raphael gestured to the plans spread across his desk. "I'm calling it Emma's Steps, named after my daughter who passed away and inspired by—" He paused, swallowing hard. "By my other daughter, who I recently discovered was homeless." Ms. Patel's expression softened. "That's powerful motivation, Mr. De Leon." "These children need more than just a roof," Raphael continued, his voice growing stronger. "They need stability, education, counseling. I was thinking we could start with 3 locations in the city, focusing on neighborhoods with the highest rates of child homelessness." For the next hour, they discussed logistics, funding, and structure. Raphael's tech background brought innovative solutions to tracking and helping vulnerable children, while Ms. Patel's experience grounded his ideas in practical reality. When his legal advisor and PR manager joined them, the conversation shifted toward strategy. "This initiative will certainly strengthen your position in court," his lawyer noted, reviewing the documents. "It demonstrates your commitment to children's welfare." The PR manager nodded in agreement. "The timing is perfect. We can schedule a press conference next week, highlighting your personal connection to the cause." Raphael frowned. "This isn't about publicity." "Of course not," the PR manager backpedaled. "But public perception matters in custody cases. Judge Harriman follows the news closely." Raphael reluctantly agreed, though something about using the foundation for court advantage left a bitter taste in his mouth. When he returned home that evening, he found Elise sitting at the kitchen table, colored pencils scattered around her. She looked up as he entered, her eyes brightening slightly. "I made something," she said quietly, sliding a paper toward him. Raphael's breath caught as he looked at the drawing. It showed the marble steps of his mansion, the same steps where he'd found her that cold morning. But what made his heart swell were the two stick figures sitting side by side on those steps, one tall, one small. "It's us," Elise explained unnecessarily, her finger touching the paper. "For your new place to help kids." Raphael knelt beside her chair, studying the simple yet powerful image. "You know about that?" Elise nodded. "I heard you talking on the phone. You said kids need safe steps." "They do," Raphael whispered, emotion thickening his voice. "And this is perfect, Elise. Would you let me use it? As the logo for Emma's steps?" For the first time since she'd arrived, Elise smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Emma would like that," she said softly. "Helping other kids find their steps." Raphael carefully folded the drawing and placed it in his pocket, next to his heart. In that moment, he knew that regardless of what happened in court, this project would become his life's most important work. Days turned into weeks, and Raphael's life became a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers, nonprofit consultants, and child welfare experts. The temporary guardianship papers sat in a manila folder on his desk, waiting for the final hearing that would determine Elise's future. When his phone rang with news from his attorney, Raphael's heart pounded. "The court date is set, Mr. De Leon, 2 weeks from today, 9 a.m. sharp," his lawyer said. "Judge Harriman's courtroom." Raphael marked the date on his calendar with a shaking hand. 2 weeks. That's all we have to prepare. "And there's something else," the lawyer added hesitantly. "The story's been picked up by the press. Not favorably, I'm afraid." That evening, Raphael scrolled through news articles on his tablet, his jaw tightening with each headline. Tech billionaire's sudden interest in fatherhood, genuine or PR stunt. Another read, De Leon's daughter drama, cold-hearted CEO claims homeless child. He set the tablet down, rubbing his temples. The media had painted him as exactly what he once was, cold, calculating, using Elise to repair his tarnished image after years of emotional detachment. The next day, Raphael was in the middle of a video conference when his phone buzzed. The school's number flashed on the screen. "Mr. De Leon, this is Principal Morales. I'm afraid there's been an incident with Elise." 20 minutes later, Raphael rushed through the school doors to find Elise sitting outside the principal's office, her shoulders hunched, eyes red from crying. "Elise," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "What happened?" She looked up, her bottom lip trembling. "They said you only want me because I make you look good. That I'm your charity case." The last words came out in a whisper. Something fierce and protective surged through Raphael. He straightened up, his expression hardening as he marched into the principal's office. "Mr. De Leon," Principal Morales began, "I understand you're upset." "Do you?" Raphael interrupted, his voice low and controlled. "My daughter was bullied today because of gossip and lies spread by adults who should know better. We've spoken to the students involved." "That's not enough," Raphael said firmly. I want an anti-bullying assembly scheduled. I want the teachers to address this directly in their classrooms. And I want your personal guarantee that Elise will be protected while she's here." By the time they left the school, Raphael's anger had cooled into determination. In the car, he turned to Elise, who sat quietly looking out the window. "You know none of what those kids said is true, right?" he asked gently. Elise nodded slowly. "I know." That night after dinner, Raphael sat beside Elise on the couch as she sketched. 2 weeks until our court date," he said. "It might get harder before it gets easier. But we're a team now, you and me, no matter what happens." Elise looked up from her drawing. "I know we'll win," she said simply. When Raphael tucked her into bed later, she pressed something into his hand, a folded piece of paper. He waited until he was alone in the hallway to open it. In careful handwriting were 5 simple words. "I believe in you, Dad." Raphael pressed the note to his chest, his eyes filling with tears. For the first time in years, he felt worthy of someone's faith. In those days, Raphael's mansion became a war room. Legal pads covered the dining table, and the constant ping of emails from his legal team broke the silence. While Elise was at school, Raphael met with a private investigator in his study, a former FBI agent with steel gray hair and tired eyes. "You were right to be suspicious, Mr. De Leon," the investigator said, sliding a thick folder across the desk. "Lorraine Grant has quite the history." Raphael opened the file and scanned the documents inside. His eyes widened as he flipped through page after page of legal records. "She's filed for custody of 3 different nieces and nephews in the past 5 years, the investigator explained. Each case followed the same pattern: emergency petitions, dramatic court appearances, and then suddenly, he snapped his fingers. Case withdrawn, always after a substantial financial settlement. Raphael's jaw tightened. She's using children as leverage for money. Precisely, and there's more. She's currently behind on rent, has maxed out credit cards, and has a gambling habit she can't afford. The investigator tapped the folder. She doesn't want Elise. She wants what you might pay to keep her. That evening, as Raphael paced his office planning his next move, his assistant brought in a plain manila envelope that had been delivered by courier. "No return address," she said. Inside, Raphael found a USB drive and a handwritten note in familiar handwriting. "I can't undo my mistakes, but maybe this will help. Clara." Raphael plugged in the drive. It contained dozens of email exchanges between Isabel and her sister Lorraine, dating back years. His heart raced as he read Isabel's final message to her sister. "Lorraine, I'm putting this in writing so there's no confusion. If anything happens to me, Raphael is Elise's father and deserves to know her. You are never to take custody of her for your own selfish reasons. I know what you did with Cousin Janet's kids. Elise is not a paycheck." Raphael printed the emails, hands trembling with both gratitude for Clara and fury toward Lorraine. The next morning, he waited outside the courthouse where a preliminary hearing was scheduled. When Lorraine arrived in a new designer suit, Raphael stepped forward from the shadows. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Lorraine's smile was cold. "Save it for the judge, De Leon." "I know about the other children, Lorraine. The cousins in Philadelphia, the nephew in Boston." Raphael held up a copy of the file. "I know about the settlements, and I have Isabel's emails warning about you." The color drained from Lorraine's face, replaced quickly by rage. "You think you're so perfect?" she hissed. "You abandoned my sister. You abandoned Elise for years. You don't deserve a second chance." "This isn't about me," Raphael replied steadily. "It's about what Isabel wanted for her daughter. It's about what's best for Elise." "What's best for Elise is to be with family," Lorraine snapped, but her voice wavered. "I am her family," Raphael said. "Her father, and I'm not going anywhere." Lorraine's eyes narrowed. "This isn't over, De Leon." "Not by a long shot." As she stormed off toward the courthouse steps, Raphael took a deep breath. The battle for Elise was just beginning, but now he had ammunition, and the determination of a father who refused to lose his daughter twice. At midnight, the mansion stood silent except for Raphael's restless footsteps. Sleep eluded him as the custody battle loomed. His mind raced with strategies, fears, and memories that wouldn't quiet down. Without thinking, his feet carried him down the hallway to Emma's room, the door now unlocked but still sacred ground. He stepped inside, not bothering with the lights. Moonlight spilled through the curtains, casting soft shadows across Emma's paintings that still hung on the walls. Raphael sank to the floor, his back against her bed, and let out a long, shuddering breath. "Emma," he whispered to the empty room. "I miss you every day." His voice cracked. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I became someone you wouldn't recognize after you left." Tears welled in his eyes as he looked around at the room he'd preserved like a museum. Now, with Elise's drawings pinned alongside Emma's artwork, the space felt different, alive again, somehow. "And Isabel," Raphael continued, speaking to another ghost. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about Elise." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "You should have told me. I would have been there. I would have tried to be a good father." A floorboard creaked softly in the hallway. Raphael looked up to see Elise standing in the doorway, her small figure silhouetted against the dim light from the hall. She clutched her teddy bear, Emma's bear, tightly to her chest. "Elise," Raphael said, quickly wiping his face. "You should be asleep." She padded across the room in her socks and sat down beside him on the floor. "You're sad," she said simply. Raphael nodded. Something about the midnight hour and the child's presence broke the last of his walls. "I am sad. I've been sad for a very long time." "Because of Emma?" "Yes." Raphael took a deep breath. "Emma was my daughter. Your half-sister. She got very sick when she was just a little older than you. The doctors tried everything, but..." His voice faltered. "I couldn't save her." Elise leaned against his arm, saying nothing, just listening. "After she died, I shut everyone out. I became cold. I focused only on making money and building walls around my heart." Raphael looked down at Elise. "When your mother tried to reach me about you, I was too proud, too broken to even read her messages." "But you didn't know about me," Elise whispered. "No, but I should have listened. I should have been there for both of you." Raphael gently touched her hair. "Then one morning I found you sleeping on my steps, with Emma's jacket and bear." "I didn't know they were hers," Elise said. "I know. But finding you there, it was like the world was giving me a second chance." Raphael's voice grew steady despite his tears. "You gave me life again, Elise. You made me remember how to care, how to love someone." Elise looked up at him, her eyes wide and understanding beyond her years. "I was scared when I came here, but not anymore." "I was scared too," Raphael admitted, terrified of loving someone again, of losing someone again. They sat in silence for a while, surrounded by Emma's paintings and Elise's new drawings. Eventually, Elise's head drooped against Raphael's shoulder. He didn't move, didn't want to break this fragile peace. Soon both father and daughter were asleep on the floor, Emma's artwork watching over them like stars. Right then and there, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Raphael sat stiffly at the defendant's table, his eyes fixed on the judge. The wooden benches behind him were packed with reporters and curious onlookers, all eager to witness the custody battle between the tech billionaire and Elise's supposed aunt. Lorraine's attorney, a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit, stood before the judge with a confident smile. "Your Honor, while Mr. de Leon's recent interest in his daughter is commendable, we must consider his history of emotional instability." He held up a folder. "These records show Mr. de Leon sought intensive therapy following his daughter Emma's death. He was diagnosed with severe depression and recommended for ongoing treatment, which he abandoned after just 3 months." Raphael's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected his private pain to be weaponized like this. "Mr. de Leon isolated himself for years," Lorraine's attorney continued. "He built a fortune while building walls. Is this the environment a vulnerable child needs? Or does she need the stability of her actual blood relative, her mother's sister?" Lorraine nodded from her seat, her face a perfect mask of concern. But Raphael caught the small, satisfied smile that flickered across her lips when the attorney mentioned Emma's death. When it was his team's turn, Raphael's lawyer rose calmly. "Your Honor, we don't deny Mr. de Leon's grief. In fact, we embrace it as evidence of his capacity for deep love and commitment." She distributed folders to the bench. "What we present today is not just a man who has changed, but a man who has transformed his pain into purpose." She displayed large photographs of the newly established Emma's Steps Foundation, the shelter Raphael had created for homeless children. "Furthermore," she continued, "we have statements from Elise's teachers noting remarkable progress in her emotional development and academic performance since coming into Mr. de Leon's care." She handed over more documents. "And psychological evaluations confirming Mr. de Leon's mental fitness and emotional stability." Raphael glanced back at Elise, who sat in the second row with a court-appointed guardian. She gave him a small, brave smile that nearly broke his heart. Just as his lawyer finished presenting, the courtroom doors opened. A clerk hurried forward and handed the judge an envelope. The judge frowned, examining it. "Counsel, I've just received what appears to be a relevant document that wasn't previously submitted." She opened it carefully. "It's a sworn statement from Clara Martinez." Raphael's head snapped up. Clara? His former assistant hadn't spoken to him since he fired her. The judge's eyes moved rapidly across the page. Her expression shifted from annoyance to interest. "Given the nature of this new evidence, I'm calling a 15-minute recess to review this document thoroughly," the judge announced, standing abruptly. "Court will resume after I've had time to consider this statement." As the gavel struck, the courtroom erupted in whispers. Raphael sat frozen, wondering what Clara could possibly have written that would impact his case, for better or worse. Out of nowhere, the court clerk cleared his throat and approached the judge with Clara's letter. The room fell silent as the judge adjusted her glasses and began to read the contents aloud. "Your Honor," the letter began, "my name is Clara Martinez, former executive assistant to Raphael de Leon for 15 years. I come forward today with a confession and testimony I believe is crucial to your decision." Raphael's heart hammered in his chest. He gripped the edge of the table, bracing himself. "I admit with deep regret that years ago I intercepted and withheld multiple letters from Isabel Grant to Mr. de Leon. Letters that would have informed him about Elise's existence. This was not done at his instruction, but by my own misguided judgment. I believed I was protecting him from further pain after losing his daughter Emma." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Lorraine's face darkened. The judge continued reading. "I witnessed firsthand how Emma's death broke Raphael. He became a shell of himself, throwing himself into work to avoid his grief. When Isabel's letters arrived, I feared they would destroy what little peace he had found." Raphael closed his eyes, the weight of these revelations pressing on his chest. "But I was wrong," the judge read, her voice softening slightly. "I've watched Raphael transform since finding Elise on his doorstep. The man who once couldn't bear to enter his daughter's room now sits on the floor with Elise, helping her draw. The man who avoided children's laughter now walks Elise to school every morning, rain or shine." The judge paused, turning the page. "Raphael de Leon is not the same man he was. He has become the father both Emma and Elise deserve. I offer this testimony not to excuse my actions, but to ensure that Elise isn't punished for my mistakes. She has finally found her home with her father." When the judge finished reading, the courtroom remained silent. Raphael's eyes burned with unshed tears. "In light of this testimony," the judge said, "I'd like to speak with Elise privately in my chambers." She nodded toward the court-appointed guardian, who gently led Elise toward the judge's chambers. 20 minutes later, they returned. Elise clutched a piece of paper in her small hands. "Ms. Grant, Mr. de Leon," the judge addressed them. "Elise has shared something I believe is relevant to these proceedings." She held up Elise's drawing, the marble steps of Raphael's mansion with two stick figures sitting side by side. "Elise, would you tell the court what you told me about this picture?" the judge asked gently. Elise looked at Raphael, then at the drawing. "That's where I found home," she said, her voice small but clear in the hushed courtroom. "On those steps, with him." She pointed at Raphael, The simplicity and honesty of her words seemed to touch everyone present. Even Lorraine's attorney shifted uncomfortably. The judge nodded thoughtfully. "I'll need one final day to consider all matters before ruling on this case," she announced. "Court is adjourned until tomorrow at 9 a.m. As people began to file out, Raphael caught Lorraine's eye. For the first time, her confident facade seemed to waver. He then looked at Elise, who was carefully folding her drawing and placing it in her pocket, a small gesture of hope in the uncertainty that still surrounded them. At sunrise, Raphael and Elise stood outside the imposing courthouse, their hands clasped tightly together. The early morning light cast long shadows across the marble steps, not unlike those of Raphael's mansion where their journey had begun. Elise wore a simple blue dress, her hair neatly braided. Raphael had knelt down to straighten her collar, his hands trembling slightly. "Are you scared?" Elise asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Raphael nodded, not hiding his fear from her. "Yes, but being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you face it anyway." Elise squeezed his hand. "Together," she said simply. As they walked through the heavy wooden doors, reporters clustered around them, cameras flashing. Raphael shielded Elise with his arm, guiding her through the crowd with gentle determination. Inside the courtroom, Lorraine sat with her attorney, her face a mask of cold confidence that didn't quite reach her eyes. The bailiff called the room to order, and everyone rose as the judge entered. Raphael could feel his heartbeat in his throat as she settled behind the bench and reviewed her notes one final time. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, the judge began, her voice filling the silent courtroom. "Including testimony from teachers, psychological evaluations, Ms. Clara Martinez's letter, and my private conversation with Elise, I have reached my decision." Raphael felt Elise's small hand tighten around his fingers. "This court grants full legal custody of Elise Grant, now Elise de Leon, to her biological father, Raphael de Leon, effective immediately." A small gasp escaped Elise's lips. Raphael's vision blurred with tears. The judge continued, her tone hardening as she turned toward Lorraine. "Ms. Grant, this court finds your petition for custody to be without merit. Evidence suggests a pattern of similar custody claims followed by financial settlements. Such exploitation of the family court system is reprehensible." Lorraine's face flushed red as she stared down at the table. "Mr. de Leon," the judge's voice softened, "the court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances of your discovery of parenthood and the significant personal growth you've demonstrated. The bond you've formed with Elise is genuine and nurturing." The judge closed her folder. Case dismissed. The gavel's bang echoed through the room, but Raphael barely heard it. Elise had already launched herself into his arms, her small body shaking with sobs against his chest. He held her tightly, his own tears flowing freely now. "We did it," he whispered into her hair. "We did it." Cameras flashed around them, capturing the moment of raw emotion as father and daughter embraced. Raphael didn't care about the publicity anymore. Nothing mattered except the small girl in his arms. Elise pulled back slightly, her tear-streaked face breaking into a smile that reminded Raphael so much of Isabel. It made his heart ache. "Let's go home," she whispered. Raphael nodded, unable to speak through his emotion. Home. They were going home. Together. After a while, the De Leon mansion transformed from a cold, empty mausoleum into a place filled with light and laughter. The heavy curtains that had once blocked the sunlight now remained open, allowing golden rays to spill across the marble floors. The silence that had haunted the hallways gave way to the sound of small footsteps and quiet conversations. Emma's bedroom, once sealed behind a "Do Not Enter" sign, had undergone the most dramatic change. Raphael had hired painters to brighten the walls with a soft yellow color. He'd replaced the bed with a large wooden table, perfect for spreading out art supplies. Elise's drawings now decorated the walls alongside Emma's preserved paintings, two sisters connected through art, though they'd never met. "Do you think Emma would have liked me?" Elise asked one evening as she and Raphael sat in the studio sketching together. Raphael looked up from his amateur attempt at drawing a lighthouse. "She would have adored you," he said softly. "Emma loved teaching others to draw. She would have shown you all her special techniques." Elise smiled, carefully adding details to her own lighthouse drawing, the same one that had led them to the truth months ago. I think Mommy would have liked Emma too. Tell me more about your mother, Raphael said, setting down his pencil. These evening conversations had become sacred to him, a way to know the woman who had raised his daughter alone. She always smelled like paint and coffee, Elise said, her eyes brightening with memory. And she laughed really loud. People would turn and look, but she didn't care. Raphael nodded, picturing the free-spirited Isabel he'd known briefly in college. That sounds exactly like her. The housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, appeared in the doorway with a gentle knock. Mr. De Leon, Ms. Martinez is here. Raphael's expression softened. Send her in, please. Clara stood hesitantly at the entrance to the studio, clutching her purse tightly. It had been nearly 2 months since the court hearing, and though Raphael had called to thank her for her letter, this was her first time back at the mansion. Clara, Raphael said, standing to greet her. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure if I should, she admitted. Elise jumped up from her chair and ran to Clara, wrapping her arms around the woman's waist. I made something for you. She pulled Clara by the hand to the art table and presented her with a handmade card. On the front was a drawing of the mansion's marble steps with 3 stick figures standing on them. Inside, in careful handwriting, were the words, Thank you for helping my daddy find me. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she read it. It's beautiful, Elise. Raphael placed a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. You were trying to protect me, in your own way. And I was wrong, Clara replied. I should have trusted you with the truth. We've all made mistakes, Raphael said, glancing around the room that had once been a shrine to his grief, but now represented healing. But we're finding our way forward. Mrs. Winters appeared again with a tray of hot chocolate and cookies. For the artists, she said with a warm smile that would have been unthinkable in the mansion's colder days. As they sat together sharing treats and stories, Raphael watched Elise teaching Clara how to draw a proper lighthouse. The mansion felt alive again, not just with the memory of Emma, but with the promise of a future where both his daughters were honored and loved. Eventually, Raphael stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the De Leon Foundation building, his hands steady, but his heart racing. Behind him hung a large banner displaying the Emma's Steps logo, a simple, powerful illustration of marble steps with 2 figures sitting side by side. The image, originally drawn by Elise on a scrap of paper, had been professionally rendered, but maintained the innocent quality of a child's perspective. 312 days ago, Raphael began, his voice clear in the microphone, I opened my front door and found a little girl sleeping on my steps. He paused, looking across the crowd of journalists, business leaders, and social workers. I didn't know then that she would save my life. Camera flashes illuminated the room as photographers captured this rare moment of vulnerability from the typically reserved tech mogul. In the front row, Elise sat wearing a blue dress that matched her eyes, her legs swinging nervously under her chair. Emma's Steps isn't just named after my daughter who passed away, Raphael continued. It honors the actual marble steps where Elise found me. Yes, found me, not the other way around. His voice cracked slightly. Those steps represent the threshold between isolation and connection, between past and future. The audience listened intently as Raphael explained the nonprofit's mission: to create safe housing and educational opportunities for homeless children throughout New York City. The first shelter would open next month, with plans for 5 more within 2 years. Every child deserves a threshold to cross, Raphael said, a door that opens and someone waiting on the other side. After the speech, Elise joined Raphael on stage. Together, they unveiled the first series of framed artwork that would be auctioned at the upcoming gala, all created by Elise herself. Each piece told a story: the lighthouse that had led them to the truth, the teddy bear that connected 2 sisters who never met, and the centerpiece, a large, detailed rendering of the mansion's marble steps. Can you tell us about this drawing? A reporter asked Elise, who rarely spoke in public. Elise looked up at Raphael, who nodded encouragingly. She stepped toward the microphone. "These are the steps where I found my dad," she said simply. "I was scared and alone, but something told me to go there. Now we want to help other kids find their steps too." The event planner, Ms. Rivera, guided them through the rest of the launch, introducing the nonprofit's team and outlining future projects. Throughout it all, Raphael kept Elise close, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. Later, as they examined the display of Elise's artwork prepared for the upcoming auction, Raphael noticed a small drawing he hadn't seen before. It showed 3 figures on the steps: a man, a small girl, and a woman with flowing hair who seemed to be watching from above. "Is that?" Raphael asked softly. Elise nodded. "It's Mommy and Emma. They helped us find each other." Raphael knelt beside her, eye to eye. "This one isn't for sale," he whispered. "This one's just for us." The nonprofit director approached with excitement, explaining that several major donors had already committed funding after hearing Raphael's speech. "Emma's Steps is going to help hundreds of children," she said. "Both your daughters would be proud." Raphael looked around the room, at the logo inspired by Elise's art, at the team ready to carry their mission forward, at the journalists spreading their story. What had begun as personal healing had transformed into something greater, a legacy honoring both Emma and Isabel, and a future where other children might find their own marble steps to cross. On that very night, the Emma's Steps Charity Gala transformed the Grand Horizon Ballroom into something Raphael hardly recognized. 3 years earlier, in this very space, he had celebrated a billion-dollar tech merger with champagne towers and business elites. Tonight the room glowed with softer lights, colorful artwork lined the walls, and children's laughter mixed with the elegant music. Raphael adjusted his tie nervously as he watched families mill about, examining the displayed artwork. Each piece had been created by children from the first Emma's Steps shelter, alongside Elise's featured collection. The centerpiece remained covered by a velvet cloth at the front of the room. "Are you ready?" Clara asked, now reinstated as his assistant but with a new, more equal dynamic between them. She handed him a glass of water. "I'm not the one giving the main speech tonight," Raphael replied, his eyes searching the crowd for Elise. He spotted her near the refreshment table wearing a pale blue dress with small embroidered stars. She was showing her sketchbook to a young girl from the shelter, their heads bent together in artistic communion. Something swelled in Raphael's chest, pride, love, and a profound sense of rightness that had replaced the emptiness he'd carried for so long. The event director tapped the microphone and the room quieted. After a brief introduction about Emma's Steps' mission and accomplishments, she announced, "And now, please welcome Elise de Leon." The audience applauded as Elise made her way to the stage. Raphael held his breath. They had practiced her speech dozens of times at home, but she had never spoken publicly to a crowd this size. Elise stood at the microphone, looking tiny against the grand backdrop. She unfolded a small piece of paper and smoothed it carefully. "My name is Elise," she began, her voice soft but clear. 313 days ago, I was cold and scared and had nowhere to go. I found some marble steps that looked safe." She paused, looking up at the audience. "I didn't know they belonged to my father." A hush fell over the room as everyone leaned forward to catch her words. "He opened the door," Elise continued, her voice growing stronger, "and didn't know he was saving 2 lives, mine and his." Raphael felt tears prick his eyes as several people in the audience dabbed at theirs. Elise's simple truth cut through all pretense. "Now we want to build more steps for more kids," she said, "because everybody needs a safe place and somebody who will open the door." She looked directly at Raphael then, and gestured for him to join her. He crossed to the stage, taking her small hand in his as they stood together. "My dad and I made something to help people remember," Elise said. "It's called The Girl on the Marble Steps." Together they pulled the velvet cloth away, revealing the centerpiece painting, Elise's most detailed work yet. It showed the mansion's marble steps in morning light, with a small figure curled up asleep, clutching a teddy bear. But the perspective was unusual, as if viewed through the opening door, with just the edge of a man's shadow falling across the steps. The audience rose in a standing ovation, many wiping tears away. Cameras flashed as Raphael knelt beside Elise, no longer the cold tech mogul, but a father reborn through love and second chances. "You did it," he whispered to her. "We did it," she corrected him, squeezing his hand. At dusk, the cemetery took on a golden hue as the setting sun cast long shadows across the peaceful grounds. Raphael and Elise walked hand in hand along the stone path, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel. Elise clutched a small canvas painting in one hand and a bouquet of white lilies in the other. Raphael carried 2 bouquets of his own, pink roses for Isabel and sunflowers for Emma. The cemetery caretaker nodded respectfully as they passed. He had seen them before and understood the significance of their visit. "It's just up ahead," Raphael said softly, guiding Elise toward the eastern corner where 2 headstones stood side by side, not by design, but by Raphael's recent arrangement. Emma's grave had been there for years, its marble headstone weathered slightly by time. Beside it now stood a newer stone for Isabel, moved from the harbor town where she had been buried. Raphael had arranged the transfer months ago, wanting to bring together the 2 women who had shaped his and Elise's lives. They stopped before the graves. The evening breeze rustled through nearby trees as Elise knelt down and carefully placed her painting at the foot of Isabel's headstone. It was a simple watercolor showing herself and Raphael holding hands, with a bright sun above them. She had signed it "Love, Elise" in careful letters. "Hi, Mommy," she whispered, her fingers tracing the engraved name. "I brought you something I made. Dad helped me with the colors." She arranged her bouquet of lilies against the stone. "I miss you, but I'm okay now." Raphael watched, his throat tight with emotion. When Elise stepped back, he knelt down between the 2 graves, placing his bouquets on each. For a long moment, he was silent, struggling to find words. "I never thought I'd be here like this," he finally said aloud, his voice breaking slightly. "With both of you. And with her." He glanced back at Elise, who stood watching with solemn eyes. "I lost one daughter, but because of her, I found the other. I'll never take that for granted again." He touched both headstones, one with each hand, as if connecting the 2 lives that had never intersected in life, but were now forever linked through him and Elise. "Isabel," he continued, "I wish I had known. I wish you had trusted me enough to tell me. But I understand why you couldn't." He paused, collecting himself. "I promise to be the father she deserves." Then he turned to Emma's grave. "My sweet Emma. I locked myself away after losing you. I thought that was loyalty, but it was fear. I hope you can forgive me for that." Elise stepped forward then, gently placing her flowers on Emma's grave. She arranged them carefully next to Raphael's sunflowers, making sure they looked just right. "I hope she knows I'm trying to be her sister now," Elise said quietly, looking up at Raphael. "Do you think she would have liked me?" Raphael pulled Elise close, wrapping his arm around her shoulders as they stood together between the 2 graves. "She would have loved you," he answered, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "Just like I do." The caretaker watched from a distance as the father and daughter stood together in the golden light, honoring the past while embracing their present. He had seen many mourners in his years tending the cemetery, but rarely had he witnessed such a powerful moment of healing. At sunrise, the sky painted itself in strokes of pink and gold, casting a gentle glow over Raphael's estate. The dew-kissed garden sparkled like it was strewn with tiny diamonds. Raphael woke to the sound of his alarm, reaching over to silence it with a practiced motion. He sat up and rubbed his eyes, noticing the unusual quiet of the morning. Normally, he would hear Elise moving around in her room, preparing for school. "Elise!" he called, walking down the hallway. Her bedroom door stood open, the bed already made, something she had learned to do without being reminded. A flutter of movement outside the window caught his eye. There in the garden, still dressed in her pajamas with a light sweater thrown over them, was Elise. She knelt in the grass, focused intently on something in her hands. Raphael slipped on his shoes and made his way outside, the morning air crisp against his face. As he approached, He saw that Elise was cradling a large glass jar filled with delicate butterflies, monarchs with their distinctive orange and black wings fluttering gently against the glass. "Good morning," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "You're up early." Elise looked up, her face brightening at the sight of him. "I wanted to catch the sunrise," she explained. "It's perfect timing." "Perfect timing for what?" Raphael asked, kneeling beside her in the grass, not caring about the dampness seeping through his pajama pants. Elise held up the jar. Inside, at least a dozen butterflies moved their wings slowly, their colors vivid against the clear glass. "Mrs. Peterson at school showed us how to raise them from caterpillars. They're ready to fly now." She paused, looking at him with those serious eyes that always seemed to see right through him. "I'm going to release them for Isabel and Emma, because they helped us fly." Raphael felt his breath catch. Even after all these months together, Elise still had the ability to say things that pierced straight to his heart. "That's beautiful," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. Elise nodded, satisfied with his response. "Will you help me?" "Of course." Together, they sat cross-legged in the garden as the sun continued its ascent, warming the air around them. Elise carefully unscrewed the lid of the jar, her small fingers working with deliberate precision. "Ready?" she asked. Raphael nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Elise tilted the jar gently. "This is for you, Mommy," she whispered. "And for Emma, too." The butterflies seemed hesitant at first, clinging to the inside of the jar. Then, one by one, they began to venture out, their wings opening and closing as if testing the freedom of the open air. They took flight in a beautiful chaos of orange and black, spiraling upward into the morning sky. Raphael and Elise watched in wonder as the butterflies danced above them, some flying high immediately while others lingered on nearby flowers before taking off again. One particular butterfly, larger than the others with especially vibrant markings, fluttered down and landed delicately on Raphael's outstretched hand. It sat there for a long moment, wings slowly opening and closing as if studying him. Elise gasped softly. "Look," she whispered, her eyes wide. "It chose you." The butterfly remained perched on his hand for several heartbeats before finally taking flight, joining its companions in the brightening sky. "Maybe that's Emma saying hi," Elise said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. Raphael looked at his daughter, this remarkable child who had appeared on his doorstep and changed everything. He felt something shift inside him, like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place. The weight he had carried for so long seemed to lift away, carried off with the butterflies into the morning sky. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and warmed his entire face. It was a smile unburdened by grief, open to joy, and completely transformed by love. "Maybe it is," he agreed, putting his arm around Elise's shoulders and drawing her close. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching until the last butterfly disappeared from view. Raphael felt a sense of peace wash over him, not the empty numbness he had mistaken for peace in the years after Emma's death, but true serenity that acknowledged pain while embracing joy. One small girl on his doorstep, one moment of hesitation before opening the door. How different his life would have been if he had turned away. Like the flutter of butterfly wings, that single moment had changed everything. Soon after the butterfly release, Elise's school held its spring awards ceremony. Raphael sat among the other parents in the auditorium, his hands folded tightly in his lap as he waited for Elise's name to be called. When her teacher announced, "The award for most inspiring student goes to Elise de Leon," his chest swelled with pride. Elise walked across the stage with careful steps, her hair neatly braided the way Clara had taught Raphael to do it. She accepted the certificate with both hands, just as they had practiced at home, and gave a shy smile to the audience before returning to her seat. "This award recognizes not only Elise's remarkable artistic talent," her teacher explained, "but also her extraordinary kindness to her classmates. Her artwork has brightened our hallways, and her gentle spirit has touched everyone around her." Raphael blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. Just months ago, Elise had been a silent, frightened child sleeping on his doorstep. Now she was thriving, sharing her gifts with the world. That evening, as the sun began to set, Raphael found Elise sitting on the marble steps at the front of the mansion, the very same steps where he had discovered her that cold winter morning. Without a word, he sat down beside her. The certificate lay in her lap, its gold seal catching the fading light. "I'm very proud of you," Raphael said softly. Elise looked up at him, her eyes thoughtful. "Mrs. Wilson said I inspire people with my art," she said, "but I just draw what I feel." "That's why it touches people," Raphael explained, "because it's honest." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the city lights began to flicker on in the distance. The evening air was warm, so different from the bitter cold of their first meeting. "Can I ask you something?" Elise said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "Anything." She traced the edge of her certificate with one finger. "If you hadn't opened the door that day, where would we be?" The question hit Raphael like a physical blow. He thought about the man he had been then, cold, isolated, buried in grief. He thought about Elise, alone in the world after losing her mother. The parallel paths they might have continued on, never intersecting, never healing. "I don't know where you would be," he said honestly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I know where I would be. Still lost. Still empty." He turned to face her fully. "I was the one who needed saving, Elise. You gave me back my heart." Elise leaned against him, resting her head on his arm. "I'm glad you opened the door," she whispered. "So am I," Raphael said, putting his arm around her shoulders. They sat together on the marble steps, the same steps that had once represented Raphael's isolation from the world. Now they were something else entirely, a beginning point, a place of hope rather than pain. Father and daughter watched as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the cityscape, leaving a canvas of twinkling lights below them. In the peaceful silence, Raphael realized that the mansion no longer felt like a mausoleum of memories. It was a home again, warm, alive, and filled with possibilities. All because one small girl had found her way to his door, and he had found the courage to open it. If you enjoyed the story of Raphael and Elise, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it. Courage to open it. If you enjoyed the story of Raphael and Elise, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.